Okay, hello. Okay, so I'm going to be reading chapter 3 and 4 from the Humble Little Condom. Okay. Le mal de Naples, la mal francois, la bubas, or the Venetian disease. Columbus and the Great Pox. By the early 16th century, select Europeans had gazed upon Botticelli's Birth of Venus and Da Vinci's Mona Lisa. Lords and ladies enjoyed their first popular secular music with madrigal singers and lute players much in demand, perhaps while they were also reading Pico della Mirandola's oration on the dignity of man and Thomas Malory's Morte d'Arthur, the fictional work that introduced the enduring legend of King Arthur and his knights. As early as 1430, a variety of typesets had been introduced by printers in Holland and Germany, making it possible for more than 35,000 books to have been published by the year 1500, a far cry from the earlier labors of the monks in their scriptoriums. The English middle class was enjoying an increasing literacy rate, creating a large market for the mass-produced books, many of which were being printed on modern paper made from wood pulp and a brand new process. Even the toothbrush had been invented by 1498. Ah, yes, the Renaissance was truly a magical time. But there was also a dark side to this brilliant idea. An era. Deadly political intrigue of the sort portrayed in Machiavelli's treatise, The Prince, was rife, leading to frequent and bloody squabbles between kings and princes over turf and trade. Fights that in turn led to a series of petty wars between city-states and nations alike. Despite the influence of brilliant men like Galileo and Copernicus, and the slow move toward enlightened thought that eventually led to the creation of humanism, citizens of Europe were still being burned at the stake for their scientific, political, and religious beliefs, or because they had been accused of cavorting with the devil. It is in this tumultuous atmosphere that Europeans like Christopher Columbus launched their campaigns to explore the uncharted lands beyond their own continent. But their adventures and the rewards that accompanied the opening up of the globe came at a very high price for many, and this proved that necessity really is the mother of invention, or in this case, the condom, a disease previously unknown. Biblical scholars believe that many of the leprous plagues mentioned in the Bible were actually references to venereal infections. After fighting with the Midianites, Israelite soldiers were ordered to execute all Midianite women prisoners that have known man by lying with him. Leviticus 14 advises washing after copulation. Beyond that, though, Romans used the condom for protection against prostitutes' spicare and Mount Vesuvius's rash. The ancients and early Europeans rarely referred specifically to sexually transmitted infections until 1495. A mysterious epidemic, hitherto unknown, which had struck terror into all hearts by the rapidity of its spread, the ravages it made, and the apparent helplessness of the physicians to cure it. A 16th century chronicler. Upon their return from Haiti, Columbus's Spanish sailors sought medical treatment in Barcelona from physician Roy Diaz del Isla, who later published the very first account of what he dubbed the Indian measles, a disease previously unknown, unseen, and undescribed, which spread thence throughout the world. After treatment, the sailors left Barcelona to sell their services as mercenaries to the Spanish and French forces fighting over control of the Kingdom of Naples. French King Charles the Eighth's army was attempting to claim Naples for the French crown, a plan that included Charles's grandeur intention of becoming Emperor of the East. In response, King Ferdinand V of Castile sent his own army to help his kinsman, King Ferdinand II of Naples, to repel the intended French invasion. When they arrived in Italy, the contagious sailor mercenaries went straight to the Neapolitan brothels, where they infected the prostitutes, who then moved on to service other soldiers, Castilian, French, and Italian. The Indian measles, which seems to have become more virulent as it traveled, spread like wildfire throughout the ranks of both camps and then into the city, transmitting the mysterious disease to more than half of the civilian population. Europe's first epidemic of what is now called the Great Pox slammed Naples in 1495, only a few years after Columbus's return from the New World. In its wake, instead of Charles becoming Emperor of the East, his foolish quest was dashed before it had really begun. His army, a ragtag collection of mercenaries from all over Europe, had been destroyed by superior forces. Charles's royal ineptitude and his disease. That was not the end for either the disease or the Spanish mercenaries, however. Some of those who survived headed to Scotland that same year, where they offered their services to King James IV and to an English pretender trying to claim the throne of Scotland. While James and the pretender battled it out over who would rule, Edinburgh was hit hard by an epidemic of the Great Pox brought by the same mercenaries. James, trying to combat the infirmity come out of France and strange parts, commanded that all light women to desist from their vices and sin of venerie, demonstrating the fact that he understood that the contagion was somehow related to sex. He also passed a law that included punishing with a distinctive brand on the cheek anyone thought to be infected with the pox. In spite of the heavy penalties, the disease continued to spread and was so feared that James decreed that any Scot who had it would be banished to the remote Scottish island of Inch. The boat left every Friday, full of sufferers. As evidenced by the Edinburgh epidemic, when the Spanish mercenaries exited Naples, they took the new disease with them, spreading it throughout Europe and beyond. As the pox moved from place to place, it was identified with the country from which it was assumed to have originated. The Italians called it the Spanish disease. The English called it the French pox. The Spanish called it the Castilian disease. The Poles named it after the Russians, and the Russians named it after the Poles. By 1505, the Christian, Polish, French, Neapolitan, Russian, Spanish, Persian, Turkish, English pox had traveled all the way to Asia. Other appellations, including la bubas, Boston Blattern, Mancabasam, Malade Frantosus, and Cupid's measles. But by the 16th century, the terrible disease was known to most simply as syphilis. Syphilis, Sive, Morbus, Gallicus. Syphilis, or the French disease. 16th century Italian humanist, physician, scientist, and poet Girolamo Francastoro actually gave syphilis its name. Friend and colleague of Copernicus and a professor of logic at the University of Padua, Francastoro was the first academic to posit the cause of the epidemics in relation to disease, and was convinced that syphilis, like other deadly contagions, was transferable through seed-like entities, transmitting infection directly or indirectly from host to host. Fascinated by the deadly contagion, Francastoro also wrote an epic poem about the French disease, renaming the contagion after his own mythic shepherd, Syphilis. Borrowing from Greek legend, Francastoro told of a young shepherd from Atlantis who was punished by Apollo for worshipping other gods. The punishment was that Syphilis, both spellings appear in Francastoro's work and in later translations, suffered from ulcers all over his body. The origins of the shepherd's name are debatable, but it is possible Francastoro borrowed it from Syphilis, a character in Ovid's Metamorphoses. But whatever its provenance, the term syphilis undoubtedly caught on it in part because it did not point the finger at any one group, country, or culture. Despite that, the poem does provide a fascinating look, not just at the early history of the spread of a deadly sexually transmitted disease, but at the politics of the time. Francastoro rightfully accused the Spanish of introducing the disease only to avoid the consequences of its spread, since from Pyrenees foot to Italy, it shed its bane on France, while Spain was free. Pink ribbons and a linen sheath, the first modern condom. Grind the wood, boil in water, drink, lock yourself in a heated, sealed room or chamber, and sweat out the ill humors. An early 16th century cure for the French disease. Throughout the 16th century, syphilis continued to spread across Europe and around the world. Quacks were everywhere, happily preying on desperate victims, selling cures in the form of recipes, poultices, amulets, and prayers. Some of the cures were benign, others almost as deadly as the disease itself. But it took more than 60 years after the first epidemic for a European to contemplate a preventative to syphilis. Gabriello Falloppio, another Italian academic, is the anatomist credited with discovering the fallopian tube. He also wrote a treatise on syphilis, De Morbo Gallico, published posthumously in 1564. Two years after his death. In it, he described the first modern condom, which he claimed to have invented. Although sheaths had been around for thousands of years prior to the printing of De Morbo Gallico, the written evidence that early modern Europeans used conventional male barriers was buried in an ancient text, innuendo, and trade secrets. So it is likely Falloppio really did believe he had invented the condom. What Falloppio describes in his book is a piece of linen sewn together to fit just the glands of the penis. The early version did not sound terribly comfortable, but according to Falloppio, it did what he had designed it to do. It prevented men from becoming infected with a venereal disease, specifically syphilis. According to Falloppio, as often as a man has intercourse, he should, if possible, wash the genitals or wipe them with a cloth. Afterward, he should use a small linen cloth made to the glands and draw forward the prepuce over the glands if he can do so. It is well to moisten it with saliva or with a lotion. I tried the experiment on 1,100 men, and I call immortal God to witness that not one of them was infected. He also recommended an alternative way to wear his condom, inserted into the urethra. It is doubtful many men availed themselves of this uncomfortable alternative application, however. Falloppio obviously made the connection between covering the man's member and disease prevention. He believed that the fluids swapped between the man and the woman were directly connected to contagion. With that in mind, he also soaked his condoms in a chemical solution which inadvertently acted as a spermicide, a technique that would remain popular for hundreds of years. Falloppio's goal was to keep men safe from disease. He kept no records on the women with whom his subjects had had sex. If he had, his second realization might have been that the fallopian condom was also a birth control device. Falloppio did at least think of women when he made one concession to feminine tastes. He had pink silk ribbons sewn on to hold them in place, with the ribbon tied around the shaft of the penis. He was quite proud of that flourish, one he very likely learned from the women who made the sheaths for him, though claiming the whole thing as his brainchild, as well as the convenience of his invention, which could be hidden away in a purse or a pocket until needed. When news of Falloppio's humble little condom spread, gone were the days of hinting at its existence and purpose, as it appeared in a variety of literary genres: medical, political, and religious. By the end of the 16th century, Hercules of Saxonia wrote about a disease preventing sheath made of linen dipped in a chemical solution and allowed to dry. But it was at the same time that French writer Leonard Lessius, in his book Law and Justice, referred to the use of the condom as immoral, which indicates that though Falloppio had been slow to realize it, the modern condom had immediately crossed over from the only thing coming between lovers and disease. to once again being recognized or acknowledged as birth control. Either way, the fantastic new invention traveled swiftly throughout Europe, across the English Channel, and around the world. Clothing and the condom, the codpiece, pretty or practical? A precursor to and first cousin of Fallopio's linen condom, and one that was considerably more public, is the codpiece. Similar to the genesis of the ancient Egyptian and Greek sheath, from clothing to protection, the codpiece grew out of some major fashion changes underway by the mid 14th century. Initially, young men who spent a lot of time on horseback and those who served in the armies began to shorten their tunics for convenience and comfort. No flowing robes or long jackets to get tangled up in. This shortening trend became so extreme that some men's costumes dwindled to hose and very short chemises. These trendy gentlemen were so likely to hang out of their scant clothing that England's rather prudish King Edward IV became very concerned on moral and visual grounds. He ordered that when a man came to his court, he had to wear some kind of jacket to cover his privy members and buttocks. This led to a series of tricky styles for flap-like coverings made to hide the offending penises, which quickly evolved into separate items of clothing and definitely objectified the male member. It was after the late 15th century syphilis outbreaks, however, that the real codpiece appeared, taking its lead from the fashion trend dictating less is more. The true codpiece was a hollow, layered box made in various shapes and sizes, often with sumptuous fabrics decorating the outside. The interior fabric lining, the interior fabric lining these sheaths was usually soft linen, probably removable for washing. Different styles sported a variety of methods in which to attach the codpiece to the wearer, much like ancient penis sheaths. And of course, they had to be easy to remove in order to answer nature's call. But what was the codpiece's relationship to syphilis? Clothing historians have pondered the true meaning of the codpiece, claiming everything from symbolic phallic worship at a time of extreme machismo in fashion history to an interesting variation of a purse. In fact, evidence points to the codpiece's evolution as a boxy sheath for protection from prying eyes, painful blows, and stained clothes. The ointments used to relieve the pain of syphilitic infection turned the penis bright orange, to be seen with the the telltale orange unguent, was a social disgrace because it proved the man had syphilis, a guaranteed way to find himself socially ostracized, in spite of the many noblemen with the disease. It also protected the outer clothing from being stained by oozing sores and messy medications. More important, this disease made a man's member very, very tender and painful. The codpiece, with its many layers and boxy, roomy nature, provided excellent protection from being jostled in a crowd and bumped by the accoutrements the average man of the late Renaissance carried on his belt: purses, swords, daggers, and so forth. The only when man's clothing styles changed and once again became more modest, did the codpiece, or the need for it, disappear. Postures and the ancient art of paper folding. What about the exotic East? European explorers had been working to establish trade relations in Asia since Marco Polo's time. By the 15th century, intrepid sailors and traders continued to forge strong import export ties in China, India, and Japan, trading European made wares for beautiful silks and other exotic goods highly valued at home. But the Westerners also brought something else to the Orient. They arrived carrying a new disease. Syphilis had reached China and Japan by the beginning of the 16th century, and India in the late 15th century. By the 1700s, even the remote islands of the South Pacific were affected. But did the peoples of the East use condoms, whether for protection from disease or birth control, by or prior to the 15th century? The simple answer is yes. Chinese condoms, Yinxia, were alternately made from oiled silk, paper, and lamb intestines. Like its early European linen counterparts, the Yinxia covered only the very top of the man's penis and was used mostly by the idle rich, men who enjoyed the kind of exotic sexual encounters described in erotic Chinese writings, but who did not want to suffer the consequences of unexpected pregnancies. Sexually transmitted infections do not really seem to have been a consideration, mainly because the Chinese were generally very careful about personal hygiene. In fact, there was one universally accepted way in which to maintain cleanliness, common throughout the country. Chinese men and women were careful to wash their private parts both before and after sex. If there were any small wounds or abrasions, they rubbed a jelly made from agar on their genitals to prevent any spread of infection. The Plums of Canton. It is believed that the Chinese did suffer from non lethal variations of sexually transmitted infections prior to the 16th century, but they were never a huge health risk until the world traveling Europeans introduced a dreaded pox, known to them as Cantonese sores or plume blossom sores. Syphilis had decimated large areas of the country. Central China was hardest hit by the second quarter of the 1600s, and it did not take long for the medical experts of the time to associate sex with the spread of the awful disease. That knowledge and understanding did not extend to the common people, however, who, not unlike the average European, blamed the disease on all sorts of real and imagined sources. They figured it was just another possible way in which to die a miserable death, lumping it together with smallpox, the plague, and other threats to the daily existence of a Chinese peasant. But the use of the yin among the upper classes helped them avert infection when syphilis hit. Portuguese pox. By the late 15th century, the Japanese also suffered from an outbreak of syphilis, which they called mancabasam, the Portuguese sickness. So named because they believed, accurately so, that it was Vasco da Gama's Portuguese sailors who had brought the disease to Japan. The spread of this terrible contagion coincided with the introduction of a European-style condom, the kawagata, or marabukuro, penis sack. It was made from fine leather and introduced to the Japanese by Dutch traders. Prior to the appearance of syphilis, the Japanese had used the kabutogata, helmet, for birth control. The helmet was made from very thin, decoratively carved tortoise shell or animal horns, but the sack was much more comfortable for men than the kabutogata, though women were said to have preferred the traditional helmet for its firmness. Either way, syphilis meant the condom served two purposes in Japanese society: as birth control and as disease prevention. Seagulls and Steeds. Both in Japan and in China, there were books devoted to the sexual act and its many possible variations. The Japanese versions included very imaginative descriptions of sexual postures and or positions. Couples had plenty of options to choose from: the flying seagulls, the galloping steed, the winding dragon, the fluttering butterflies, bamboos near the altar, the two dancing female phoenix birds, to name a few. There is evidence that as condom use became more prevalent among the Japanese, its use was incorporated into the rituals involved in the choice of sexual postures. Putting on the penis sack was treated as a sort of foreplay, slipping on the kawagata as the couple got into position. The postures, however, may have been inspired by a much earlier source. In the 8th century Japan, Shinto priests used the venerable art of paper folding to make a truly amazing condom. A relative of origami, the art of kokigami was the celibate priest's contribution to art and to the history of the condom. Elaborately folded into shapes of exotic, ferocious, and viral animals such as tigers, bears, and lions. The paper condoms were meant to bring out the beast in any man. The wearer was instructed to picture himself as the animal he was wearing while he and his partner acted out the appropriate fantasies during sex. For the unimaginative, the paper condoms came with fab scripts written by the priests. There is no way to tell quite what happened to the kokugami when the games began, but there was nothing humble about this condom. The Kama Sutra. Although syphilis had reached India by the end of the 1490s, Indians' use of the condom does not seem to intersect with disease prevention or birth control. But Dhamma Sutra of Vatsana talks about positions, stimulants, and apodravayas, condoms. Some historians believe that the apodravaya was similar to the Egyptian strap-on condom, meant to enhance the look and size of the penis and to provide plenty of stimulation for the woman and the uncomfortable for the man. Materials Dhamma Sutra recommended, wood, copper, silver, ivory, and gold, corroborated this view. But he also describes leather and buffalo horn condoms, both popular in Japan, which leaves the purpose of the Indian condom open to speculation, as do the descriptions of the three types of apodravayas Dhamma Sutra describes. The first is the armlet, which should be the same size as the ligum penis and should have its outer surface made rough with globules. Globules. Then there was the couple, which was made up of two armlets put together, and finally the bracelet, which was three armlets joined together until they come up to the required length of the lingam. The traditional interpretation of these devices is that they were intended to be worn by men struggling to satisfy hard to please women. But it is possible that the armlet, the couple, and the bracelet were meant to serve a more practical purpose. Either way, the Eastern cultures were in many ways far ahead of the West when it came to inventiveness and creativity, and the humble condom. Chapter 4. May prick nor purse never fail you. Parliamentarians, poets, pundits, and provenance. Many historians have dubbed the 17th century the century of war, an era when European leaders were using innovative new technologies to produce ever more powerful weaponry in their competition for land, wealth, and power. The 30 Years' War was one of many fought at this time, and just the name gives some clue as to the length of time meant spent brutalizing their neighbors. The 18th century differed little, as the French Revolution proved just how cruel people could be toward their own. But like most other ages and eras in Western history, these were also times of great hope and intellectual development. As Sir Isaac Newton discovered calculus, John Milton defended the freedom of the press, John Locke suggested that the way to peace and prosperity for all was religious tolerance, the brave scientists and philosophers who still faced the possibility of cruel punishment for suggesting radical or irreligious ideas continued to promote the notion that reason, rather than war and violence, could win against ignorance, want, superstition, and tyrannical leadership. Less exalted but important evidence and events and quirky trends also mark this as an exhilarating time in history. Newspapers became available in major cities all over Europe, replacing the old weekly broadsheets. Stradivarius began making his violins. Parisians were using the self-loaded ink pen by 1657, and women's skirts were getting bigger and more elaborate, while men wore lots of leather and lace. And the arts and literature blossomed. Cervantes' Don Quixote de la Mancha made its debut in Spain in 1615, and Parisians danced to the new minuet. English poetry lovers elected John Dryden as their first poet laureate, and Shakespeare's Othello, Measure for Measure, and All's Well That Ends Well were performed at his Globe Theatre in London. In 1631, women finally broke the age-old no woman rule and appeared on the English stage, while Italian Francesca Cassini became the first woman to direct an opera. Eventually, this brilliant, eccentric, and eclectic era was simply dubbed the Enlightenment. The condom thrived. In spite of the lingering threat of disease and infection. Life during the 17th and 18th centuries was anything but chaste, especially for the well-to-do. Along with the high-minded treatises by the great minds of the Enlightenment, there were also books, plays, poetry, and private diaries full of anecdotes about interesting sexual encounters. These provide snapshots of the more lascivious side of European life and prove that the condom had by this time become so vital a component in the intimate lives of many. It was featured in some surprisingly public literary venues. Robinet and Susanne, Scuole des Filles, The Philosophy of Girls, was a bawdy book that did double duty as pornography and sexual manual. Written by an anonymous Frenchman and first printed in Paris in 1655, the author described in lurid detail an unusual prop. The hero of the tale wore his condom proudly. As he put it on, lover Robinet listened to his intimate friend Susan talk about how amazing it was that a simple little piece of fabric made of linen and tied around his member with a silk ribbon could catch the seed. Although the book was publicly condemned as obscene and reportedly popular only with the lower classes who could not have afforded it or been able to read it, copies of it were in great demand among the nobility, especially the ladies of the court. In the same year, it was published as a novel. Escole des Filles was produced as a play, opening to packed audiences in Paris and other major French city centers. In the live version, surely X rated, the condom was not left out of the plot. In fact, in one scene it was played a conspicuous role, with Robinet donning un petit linge, a small cloth, in front of titillating audiences. While Robinet slowly put on his condom, Suzanne turned to the audience and extolled the virtues of un petit linge as a birth control device. Not only was this rowdy content for a 17th century or a 21st century play, it is probably the earliest Western literary reference to the condom as a contraceptive. Condom, Condon, Conton, doctor or colonel. A gut learned called blind, till Condom for the great invention famed, found out its use, and after him 'twas named. In spite of the fact that shortly after Fallopio's experiment, public knowledge of the condom had spread quickly across Europe. Just the word condom illustrates that poor Fallopio was never really credited with his brilliant invention. Men do not put on a Fallopio prior to having sex, and the Italian anatomist's contribution to public health has been all but lost to history. It is usually the English who were credited or blamed with inventing the little sheath. In 1666, the year of the Great Fire of London, the English Birth Rate Commission officially documented the condom's popular use throughout the country by explaining that the significant decrease in births at the time was due to the use of condoms. This is the first time that spelling, or anything close to it, was used in an official government document. Although the true etymology of the word is not and will likely never be known, the most persistent tradition explaining the origins of the word condom in all its varietal spellings grew up around England's King Charles II. The King Charles condom legends have survived to the present day. The story goes that the little device was actually the invention of a 17th century royal physician, Dr. Condom, who served Charles II as his personal surgeon. In some versions of the legend, he was also referred to as Colonel Condom. King Charles was deeply concerned about his army contracting the clap, a term coined in the 17th century describing all sexually transmitted infections, but later associated specifically with gonorrhea. Fearing a major contagion could spoil his chances of regaining the English throne, knowing he could never force abstinence upon his fighting men, Charles asked his personal surgeon to find a way to prevent infection. After the good doctor, or colonel, designed a linen sheath, complete with silk ribbon, the king had all his soldiers supplied with the new invention. The legend goes on to say that Charles also had the colonel provide the royals promiscuous aristocrats with the little items, hoping to limit the number of illegitimate children running around his court. One version of the story also says that poor Dr. Condom was so embarrassed by his newfound fame and notoriety that he had to change his distinctive name and go underground, never to be heard from again. Strangely, the oldest preserved condoms from the 17th century did belong to the officers of Charles's father, Charles I. These sexual artifacts were found in a privy in the English Midlands, Castle Dudley. During the English Revolution of the 1640s, it appears the royalist officers had their last fling the night before a big battle fought on and around the grounds of the castle. Since they chose to protect themselves with their fish and animal bladder, not linen, condoms, they must have expected to win. Their caution was unnecessary, however, as Charles's army was routed that day, and the officers did not survive to appreciate the benefits of their precautions, though their paramours must have been grateful. Although it is true the condom traveled around Europe, across the English Channel, and back again, and Charles did want to keep his army and his royals safe from disease and unwanted bastards, there was no Dr. Condom. First, the modern origins of the condom lie in Italy. Second, the condom is not, in any of its creative spellings, an English surname. So, where does the word come from? There are a number of medieval Latin words that may provide clues. Condus, meaning both preserve and receptacle, reflecting the fact that the original intent for the little device was to preserve the wearer from disease, and that it was a receptacle for the seed. Then there is Conduma, meaning house, con or cum, meaning with, toma or duma, meaning roof of a house, or even Quondum, which is either a false scabbard worn over a sword or the oilskin case for holding the colors of a military regiment. Condus, conduma, or kundum. Whatever the provenance, the legends are a fascinating addition to the history of euphemisms for the humble little condom. Shakespeare's glove and the poetic Quondam. Especially in 16th and 17th century Scottish English, there were a lot of common idiomatic and slang words that were associated with sex, and many began with qua, qu, pronounced ke, which replaced the c in more standard English spellings. Word like quipt, meaning a man's genitalia, huedam, a kadam, a common prostitute, and quaint, which Chaucer used extensively in the wife of Bath's tale to describe a woman's privy parts, is just a short list of sexy words, QU words. However, the most interesting quondam appears in Western literature's most important works, strongly suggesting the possibility of a Shakespearean condom. It seems more than probable that Will Shakespeare, a man with a profound sense of his own times, would have known about condoms and their increasing usage during his lifetime. He would also have been exposed to them as a soldier while serving in Flanders. Either way, it seems very likely he may have cleverly incorporated the little item into some of his best comic and sexually charged dialogue. For instance, in some editions of Henry V, the character Pizzle, Old English slang for penis, is married to Mistress Quickly. Pizzle, sometimes spelled pistol, says of his new wife, I have and I will hold the quondam quickly, perhaps inferring the childless couple intended to remain that way. In Troilus and Cressida, Shakespeare again used quondam, and he introduced the word glove, which was a common condom euphemism at the time, and one that is still in use today. Hector's cleverly paired words certainly suggest more than something worn on the hand. Oh, you, my lord, by Mars his gauntlet thanks, mock not that I affect the untraded oath. Your quondam wife swears still by Venus's glove. Mars and Venus are unmarried lovers. The gauntlet, glove, quondam. In Much Ado About Nothing, Margaret and Benedict exchange sexy banter. Give us the swords, we have bucklers of our own. If you use them, Margaret, you must put in the pikes with a vice, and they are dangerous weapons for maids. Then Benedict mentions a whole bookful of these quondam carpet-mongers whose names yet run smoothly in the even road of a blank verse, were never so truly turned over and over as my poor self in love. Shakespeare, who better to leave a lexical condom conundrum than the bard himself. Shakespeare, who better to leave a lexical condom conundrum than the bard himself? The English Parliament, poetic censure of the QuonDam. By the first decade of the 18th century, English jurors, poets, writers, and pundits were openly discussing and parodying the condom, confirming not only its common use, but also its controversial place in the sexual lives of many Britons. In 1708, as he stood at the dais before a packed parliament, John Campbell, the second Duke of Argyll, waved a condom high over his head so that his fellow members could get a good look at it. As he flapped away, the agitated Duke roared his description of the dreaded instrument. Certain instrument called a Condom occasioned the debauching of great number of ladies of quality and young gentlewomen. This first mention of the condom, with the chronicler's interesting Scottish or Shakespearean spelling, in the Houses of Parliament shocked the Conservative members of Parliament's audience for more for its theatrics than for the public display of the little linen sheath with its pink ribbon. But the Duke, who was known as a sober, thoughtful, a good husband, whose loftiness of mind did not prevent his harboring the most illiberal contempt of women, was so offended by the increased use and increased public availability of the QuonDam that he was willing to make a fool of himself for the cause. He fervently hoped to make it a public offense to sell or use them. Contrary to what he had hoped, Campbell's eccentric display did nothing but give his political detractors a rich opportunity to parody him, not because they were particularly defensive of the device, but because they hated the Duke. He was a Scottish Duke, but he was dedicated to the union of England and Scotland. Since his was the minority view among the Scottish members of Parliament, they took great pleasure in penning a little ditty for the condom hating countryman. In a brief verse which referred to the condom as a disease preventative, Scottish Lord Belhaven wrote in a Scotch answer to a British vision, when reasoning answered by second votes and speeches are bantered by outfilled turncoats, the syringe and condom come both in request, while virtuous condom is treated in jest. Rhyme and Reason, Chapter and Verse, written in 1708, a longer, less politically driven bit of prose by an anonymous author, also extolled the disease-preventing virtues of the condom in the oddly named Almonds for Parrots, with a word or two to a scurrilous style called St. James's Park, with a word or two in praise of condoms. The author parodies the happy invention made of gut, which quenched the heat of Venus's fire, and yet preserves the flame of love's desire. O matchless condom, thou hast secured thy fame to last as long as condom is named. Such mighty things are by thy influence done. Thou hast the foremost of this age outrun. Vulcan himself has been outstripped by these, thou patron of the Pathian deity. For Mars's heroes shin arms he made, but thou for Venus takes up Vulcan's trade. Superior much thou doest the god outshine. Achilles' armor cannot match with thine. Thine makes the night invulnerable still. Condom has quenched the heat of Venus's fire, and yet preserved the flame of love's desire. O condom, blessed must be thy teeming brain, that proves at length nature made naught in vain, but such capacious heads as thine can find for what they were at first by her designed. Long had the paeans of the age who shine in arts and boast themselves of race divine. Long had these Acheulean heroes vexed their leisure thoughts, and long their minds perplexed, to search the cause why nature had assigned to men and brutes a gut the learned called blind, till condom for the great invader famed, found out its use, and after him 'twas named. Hail, mighty leader of the condom crew, who charged the fair armed Kappa P like you. The noble Ali first you did impart the secret knowledge of your saving art, which had you taught Orreri before who'd saved his calves, not such as Israel did adore, but such as he has offered to his whore. And now who have we illustrious race, from my lord's valet to his very grace, that can be said to be instructed right, unless he knows with condoms how to fight. Happy invention, that is grown a trade, whereby some honest people get their bread, but they in every market can't be had. The huckster dealers only will them sell at the park, spring garden, playhouse, or the mall. This pity that a grant is not obtained, that something may be to the public gained, that like New Rome, New Britain may appear, and our wise laws appoint a register to enter condom hawkers every year. At first read, it might seem odd that anyone would spend time penning prose about condoms, but this is really poking fun at the busy sex trade of that century. Style wise, in spite of its lewd subject matter, it is reflective of 18th century poetic verse and borrows both content and plenty of style from both popular works, including Shakespeare's Venus. It also offers an amazing amount of information about condom use and sales in 18th century London. The mention of registering condom hawkers helps to document the fact that condom peddlers were a common sight throughout London, especially in places like St. James's Park, Spring Garden, and the Pall Mall, all spots popular with Londoners for their beauty and history, and well known as locations for illicit assignations between men and women, prostitutes and their customers. Perfect locations, in other words, for selling sex aids. There were actually two versions. There were actually two versions of almonds for parrots distributed around London. And in the expurgated version, there is also a glimpse into alternative lifestyles of the time. Although it began as a satire about sex for sale, almonds also referred to the fact that places like St. James's Park were infamous locations for the homosexual rendezvous and hinted at condom use by gay men. But art surpasses nature, and we find men may be transformed into womankind. Oh, happy change, but far more wondrous skill. That cursed love's wounds without the doctor's pill anticipates even condom's secret art, at first invented to secure the part. Unlikely sonneteers. In his 1728 poem, A Tale, poet William Pattison offered an accurate description of what a condom of the day looked like. The interceptive shield was colored a dirty yellow and bound with blue. He also reminded his readers that the major difference between the cloth and the gut condom was that the gut variety worked best when wet, and that it smelled. O parent wave from whence it came, still mindful the Italian dame ordains it shall all sizes fit, provided that it first be wet, and when put off to end of time should smell of fish and sell of smine, and feel, let me read that again. O parent wave from whence it came, still mindful the Italian dame ordains it shall all sizes fit, provided that it first shall be wet, and when put off to end of time should smell of fish and feel of slime. Even the English poet laureate Nicholas Rowe wrote of the armor that was gaining such favor in 18th century England and Europe. The man, dear friend, who wears a condom may scour the hundreds round at random, whether it please him to disport in the wild street or in the coulson's court. He fears no danger from the doxies, laughs at their f's and scourges at their poxies. It's crossed out. Another curious literary consideration of the condom was authored by the creatively named Roger Fuquel, Esquire, who wrote a new description of Maryland, an examination of the female anatomy, thinly disguised as a travelogue. Mr. Fuquel told men that in order to protect themselves from Maryland's dangerous heat of the climate, they had to put on proper clothing made of an extraordinary fine thin substance and contrived so as to be all of one piece and without a seam. Only about the bottom it is generally bound round with a scarlet ribbon for ornament. Mr. Fuquel apparently understood the beauty of seamless clothing. For many centuries, one of the biggest complaints about condom use came from women who hated being rubbed raw by a poorly fashioned seam. The Gallant French, not long after the publication of Maryland, bespoke of the wonders of clothing. Another anonymous Frenchman published a detailed description of the use of condoms among his fellow countrymen. Similar to earlier French works of fiction, History amoureuse and Badine du Congrès et de la Ville d'Utrecht, printed in 1714, praised the virtues of the miraculous preventive that did not interfere at all with pleasure. This excellent armour, raved Anonymous, was made of a very fine fabric or animal bladder and was more effective than if made from iron. His armour was to be fitted on the man's gallant only when he was ready to thrust forward. Oh, and the armour was tied onto the man's gallant with a nice little ribbon. The condom-loving Frenchman, one who was anything but anonymous, was famous in the aristocratic world of pre-revolutionary France as an art critic and a social analyst. Louis Petit de Parchemont was also passionate about the use of condoms. A minor aristocrat himself, Parchemont had access to the Parisian salons of that city's most influential 18th century elite. There, he collected and chronicled in his personal journals the secrets of the rich and famous. To the horror of many, Parchemont published the enormous collection of his diaries as Mémoires secrètes de la République des Lettres, Secret Memories of the Republic of Letters. Although his writings were little more than spicy gossip, touted by the publisher as offering up all the details of vaudevilles sur la cour, circuses of romance, They were also an authentic reflection of the sexy, spirited, social, and sometimes the watched period of that era in French history. Autrement specialized in discussing gossip and other people's sex lives, but he was serious when he recorded in his personal diary a couplet he had penned for a beautiful former ballerina. You know the use of the condom. The condom, my daughter, is the law and the prophet. The quixotic verse illustrates the author's commitment to the little device as disease preventative and probably birth control, and his desire to pass on the wisdom of its use. It was also timely advice for the poor woman who had to turn to prostitution after her career in the ballet had ended badly. History's most protracted prophylactic poetry, the longest poetic work about condoms, written about 1723 by an Anglican rector, White Canet, has to be the Ode to the Condom, the son of the Bishop of Peterborough. Canet praised the condom as birth control and disease preventative, rescuing women from Big Belly and the squalling brat, as well as providing protection from the bubas. Neither the Church of England nor the bishop recorded for history any responses to this clergyman's prurient prose. Ode to the Condom, a panegyric upon Condom. O all ye nymphs in lawless love's disport, assiduous, whose ever open arms, both day and night stand ready to receive the fierce assaults of Britain's amorous sons, whether with golden watch or stiff brocade, you shine in playhouse or the drawing room, whores thrice magnificent, delight of kings and lords of goodliest note, or in mean stuffs, ply every evening near St. Clement's pile, or church of fame St. Dustane, or in lane, or in alley's dark recesses, or open street, known by white apron, bartering love with skit, or strolling lawyer's clerk at cheapest rate, whether of Needham's or of Jordan's train, hear and attend. In Condom's mighty praise I sing, for sure 'tis worthy of a song. Venus, assist my lays, thou who presidest in city ball or courtly masquerade, goddess supreme, sole authoress of our loves, pure and impure, whose province 'tis to rule, not only over the castor marriage bed, but filthiest stews and houses of kept dames. To thee I call, and with a friendly voice, Condom I sing. By Condom now I cure boldly the willing maid, by fear awhile kept virtuous, owns the power and takes thy joys, tumultuous joys untasted but by them, unknown big belly and squalling brat, best guard of modesty, best guard of modesty. She riots now, thy votary in the fullest of thy bliss. Happy the man who in his pocket keeps, whether with green or scarlet ribbon bound, a well-made condom, he nor dreads the ills of skankers or scordy or bubus dire. Thrice happy he, for when in lewd embrace of transport feigning whore, creature obscene, the cold insipid purchase of a crown, blessed chance, sight seldom seen, and mostly given by Templar or Oxonian, best support of Jewry and her starved inhabitants. With condomed arm he wages amorous fight, fearless, secure, no doubt of future pains, resembling prick of pins and needle point, her cheeks in raptures or disturbs his joys. So Ajax, Grecian chiefs with sevenfold shield, enormous, brave the Trojans' fiercest raged, while the hot daring youth, whose giddy lust, or taste too exquisite in danger's spite, resolves upon fruition, unimpaired by intervening armor, condom height, scarce 3 days pass, bewails the dear bow's bliss, for now tormenting sore with scalding heat of urine dread, forerunner of the clap. With eye repentant he surveys his shirt, diversified with spots of yellow hue, sad symptom of 10,000 woes to come. Now no relief but from surgeon's hand, or pill prescribed leech, tremendous sight. To youth diseased in garret high he moans with wretched fate, where vexed with nauseous draughts and more afflicting blues, he in pangs unfelt before curses the dire results of lawless revealing from morn to eve, by never casing keen emetics urged, nor slights he now his grandm's sage advice, nor feels he only but in megrimmed head fraught with horror, child of sallow spleen, millions of idle whims and fancies dance, alternate and perplex his laboring mind. What erst he has been told of sad mischance, either in pox or clap of falling nose, scrapped shins of bubas pains of vile effect, all feels the youth of fancies that he fills, nay, be it but a gleet or gentlest clap. His ill foreboding fears deny him rest, and fancies poxes vexed his tortured bones, too late convinced of condom sovereign use. Hell, hail, mains of love propagating pimp, long since deceased, and long by me adored, and from whose prolific brain by lucky hit or inspiration from all gracious heaven first sprang the mighty secret to guard and get from poison virulent of unsound dame. Hail, happy Ablion, in whose fruitful land the wondrous pimp arose, from whose strange skill in inmost nature thou hast reaped more fame, more solid glory than from Newton's toil. Newton, who next is England's noblest boast, if aught I can presage, as Smyrna once, Chaos and Colophon and Rhodine Isle, famous for vast Colossus and Argos fair, and Salmias, well known for Grecian flight, with mighty Xerxes and of source of art. High Athens, long contended for the praise of Homer's birthplace, egregious bard. In after time so shall with warm dispute Europa's rival cities proudly strive, ambitious each of being deemed the seat where condoms first drew vital air. Too cruel fate, partial to human race, to us propitious, but oh hard decree, why so long in darksome womb of night dwelt the profound cranium late revealed? Say I not rather why, ye niggard stars, are not your blessings given unparalleled with ill and love, your greatest blessing free from curse of disease? How many gallant youths have fallen by the iron hand of death, untimely, immature, as if to love your everlasting purpose were a crime. But O ye youths born under happier stars, Britannia's chiefest hope, upon whose cheeks gay health sits smiling, and whose nervous limbs sweet ease, her offspring fair, invigorates unbraced as yet by foul contagion. Favorites of fortune, let thy unhappy lot of others teach you timely to beware, that when replete with love and spurred by lust, you seek the fair one in her cobweb haunts, or when allured by touch of passing wench, or caught by smile insidious of nymph, who in green box and playhouse nightly flaunts, and fondly calls thee to love luscious feast. Be cautious, stay a while till filthy armed with condom shield and rumor best supplied, or never failing rose, so you may thumb the ecstatic harlot, and each joyous night crown with fresh raptures, till at least unhurt and sated with banquet you retire. By me forewarned, thus may you ever treat love's pleasing paths in blessed security,